This episode is about how you can use AI to help you with your tax research. That is, finding the answer to tax questions. But this episode also covers how you can use AI effectively in your tax research, along with safeguards and precautions for you to be aware of. Joining us in this episode is Tony Court, who has worked in tax for over 40 years, and he has also been involved in the creation of an AI tax research tool called Genial, which forms part of AI Tax Essentials for Advisors. You're listening to episode 120 of the Tax Professionals podcast, the podcast that helps tax professionals with their tax careers, passing their tax exams, and becoming a better tax professional.
Welcome to the Tax Professionals podcast, the podcast dedicated to helping you improve your tax career. Here's your host, Jack Bonehill.
Hi everyone, and welcome to this episode. If you've been around for a while, you'll know that I'm one of those unusual people that actually likes tax research. I enjoy going through legislation, guidance and case law, and piecing the answer together, particularly where that will result in a massive win for a client, whether that's saving them tax, protecting a historic tax position, or defending a client against HMRC. I'm also that annoying person that loves being right. The thing is about tax research is that it can take an awfully long time. There's been countless occasions where it's taken me days to get to the bottom of something. So, for a while now, I've actually been really keen to start using AI in tax research, as I'm hoping it will speed things up and reduce the frustrating circumstances where you don't seem to be getting anywhere or you can't seem to find what it is that you need. But until now, I've not had access to any of these tax-specific AI tools. I've been really impressed with this one that I have got access to. It's called Genial, which is part of AI Tax Essentials for Advisors, provided by Lefebvre. This brings us to our guest in this episode, Tony Court, who is a tax professional that has been working in tax for over 40 years, and he's been involved in the creation of this AI tool. As part of his involvement, he's been testing the AI tool throughout its development, and so he has a lot of experience in using AI in tax research now. I've tested Chat GPT and the likes with tax research and in other areas too, and over time I've noticed that there is a trick to getting better results out of them. It depends on the questions you ask and the information that you put in. When it comes to tax, we can't afford to be wrong. We need to be right and thorough, so we need to be careful with the use of AI. We need to know how to use it well, along with its limitations and how to manage the risk associated with using them. Since Tony has had so much experience at using an AI tool for tax research now, he's here to share his tips, tricks and advice with us so that you can start reaping the benefits of AI in tax research, hopefully saving you time and making your working life just easier in general. Rough timings for each section of this episode can be accessed in the show notes at thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/TTPP120, or they can be accessed in the details section of this episode within your podcast player of choice. Genial is the best AI tax research tool that I've used so far, so if you are interested, you can take a look at thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/AI. And from there, you can book a demo with them if you like. And they are actually also offering a discount to listeners of the podcast. And to redeem this, all you need to do is tell them that you're a listener. But obviously, that's only of use if you decide that you actually want to purchase their tool. I'm actually also adding a bit about using AI tools into my tax research masterclass, as it's going to be an important tool in the kit bag going forward for tax research. The Tax Research Masterclass is just one of the courses that I deliver to help you and other tax professionals and tax teams, specifically in relation to developing valuable skills for working in tax, so that you can master tax skills, improve efficiency, increase revenue, and improve work quality. Time and time again, I hear about the quality of CPD dropping, and most courses out there are in relation to a particular tax rules or tax knowledge. And I know I don't really get much from these sessions, and it seems like others don't too. They just cover way too much information too quickly, and I don't learn much in those sessions. So I've been really careful when creating my courses to make sure that this is not the case. Within my masterclasses, there are exercises to allow you to start using what's taught straight away to help you actually learn things and to make sure that you have practical experience of using that information. And I also include real stories from my own experiences to bring the course to life, make it more interesting and make it more impactful. Within the last week, actually, I've created a flyer which gives a bit of information about each of my courses, along with associated benefits and expected return on investment. I've kept it short and to the point because if you do want further details, all you have to do is ask me or we can have a chat. You can download a copy of the flyer by heading on over to thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/flyer. Without further ado, let's get to the episode. So just to start us off, Tony, can you just tell us a little bit about you and your tax career?
Yeah, a long tax career going back over 40 years now. In fact, over 45 years. I started my tax life in the revenue in 1980. I spent about 8 years with HMRC, or Inland Revenue as it was then, in the tax inspectorate rather than the tax collector or valuation officer or many of the other arms of the revenue. So yeah, went in at one level, finished at a higher level, and then decided the time was right for moving on to private practice, primarily because I could see the way the revenue was going, which didn't really imbue a great deal of confidence in me. So moved into private practice, where I had a mixed portfolio of mainly personal tax, but also corporate tax clients, and a whole range of people, from high net worth individuals right down to tiny corporations, little old ladies with tax returns. So a good grounding. I stuck around in that practice for something like 10 years, in fact. And then I moved on to another private practice who were a bit more progressive than the previous one. They were actually interested, like me, in IT and using IT for their software. And they used one of the sort of early IT models for preparing their tax returns. It was still very antiquated by today's standards, and there was absolutely nothing in the cloud. So everything had to be stored on disk. So that lasted for something like 12 years, and the role in tax publishing came up, and I wouldn't say I jumped at it. I tentatively put my toe in the water, decided I quite liked it, and then dived in. So and joined what was Indicator, now is Lefebvre and Knowledge UK, part of a European group. And they published, they had a website, they had newsletters, which was their primary form of providing and conveying information. But they wanted the website side of content developed. They needed more books, more reports, more online content. And it's been on that path, on that trajectory, since I joined the firm in 2008. So coming up for 17 years. We've brought in more editors, more people. We've merged, we've expanded, we've joined part of a bigger group. And yeah, I'm still enjoying the work, but after in excess of 45 years, I'm beginning to think that, I may need to hang up the keyboard and sort of sit back and enjoy life a little bit more. But yeah, that's where I am. And of course, as far as AI is concerned, that has come onto the horizon maybe 2 to 3 years ago in terms of the tax world. And I obviously couldn't resist hanging around to find out more and learn more and get involved more in that, which is what brings me to you.
What is the extent of your involvement being in this then? Because it sounds like you're not a coder, for example, or a programmer, so you probably haven't been involved in like doing that per se. But like, how have you been involved in the creation of this AI tool then that Lefebvre has now got on offer?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, coding is something altogether different, as you're aware. No, my role here was as a, if you look, I hate to say this, tax expert, was to test the system and to provide, I'm not going to say exhaustive, but near exhaustive responses. To give you an example, we would create maybe 50 tax questions that covers everything from tax codes to purchase of private closed company owned shares, IHT. It's surprisingly difficult to create relatively quickly 50 questions that cover the scope of taxation. And what would then happen is we would then have to pose those questions to the test model of the AI we were creating. And then we would have to rate the answers, rate the links it provided, rate 101 different aspects of the answers it gave. And then that process would be, this is all part of the training, as they call it, AI training. IT boffins would then get onto that and they would tweak something. I'm not going to say what because I don't know. And then you would do the whole process again and again. So was quite involved, quite time consuming. And ultimately you would end up with hopefully something where it's producing good answers. Which is not to say that you produce the answers that AI was going to use. It was merely you looking at the answers that AI gave and using your knowledge and saying, well, actually, it's not a good answer. It's either incomplete or it is wrong or it's misunderstood something. And so the IT guys would then work on that and try and train those traits out of the system. And that's where we end up with today. I mean, some of the issues here are the problems that arose is because the models of AI that were being used, the platforms, we actually, in ours, we chose to use OpenAI, in other words, Chat GPT. But the models were, the base models themselves were basic or less intuitive than they are, just less good than they are now. So you were working in a situation where the goalposts were moving, maybe not very far, but they were moving all the time, and they're continuing to move. So, yeah, my role essentially was to provide the expertise behind it in order for it to produce the best answers. Yeah, whether it's the best answer or not is perhaps subjective, but that was what was behind the process.
Okay, so to make sure I'm understanding then, so essentially what happened then is there was let's say a somewhat early version of the AI tool produced. You then came up with your questions, you essentially put them into the software, you got an output, and you had to say whether it was good or bad and why. So then the IT people could go away and use that information to to improve the system, and then they would keep iterating until it got to a point where you're like, okay, now it's producing good answers in 90% of cases or something like that.
Well, that's a perfect explanation, and I should have said that first, but quite obviously. But yeah, that is exactly what happened. So it's an ongoing process even now. But that was before we could launch it. You have to get to a certain point where you can launch it with some confidence, and we'll get on to why. I'm sure you're going to ask me about why it apparently may not give an answer that you like or that you feel comfortable with. We'll get onto that in a bit. And it's not necessarily to do with the training or indeed the AI's ability to comprehend and answer that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I suppose now as well, then, because you've got people like outside of testers actually using the platform, I'm guessing if they're not happy with an answer or something's not come right, they will sometimes report it to you guys as well. So you're getting like live uses of the system there as well to be able to improve it,
yeah.
by the sounds of it.
Yeah, I've had in the last few days, I'm not the only person that is involved, but I'm probably at the centre of dealing with queries that are using our AI. And I've had two come across my desk in the last few days. So, but sure, yeah, we get generally very good feedback, but once in a while we will get something and which comes back, and it may be something as simple as someone saying, "This is not giving me the information for the correct year," and again, that often comes down to the way in which the information is presented to the AI, not necessarily the AI itself. It's just doing what it thinks you want, which isn't always what you do want.
Yeah. That's why there's an element of almost skill or training needed for the person inputting questions into it as well, which I think because people think it's so intuitive and it's like having a conversation, I think people are glossing over that bit somewhat. Do you know what I mean?
No, I know exactly what you mean. There's an old, again, for those that are in IT and those that are maybe of an age, there used to be the expression, and you may be familiar with it, which is GIGO, which was an acronym for garbage in, garbage out, which was a coder's term. So, if your coding was rubbish, then the output would be rubbish. It's simple as that. That is now the level at which that expression has become true again, but at the level at which it applies, it's no longer just a coding issue. It's now an issue of using, particularly, in my view, using AI. If you ask it a very silly question, it will give you a very silly answer.
Yeah, you know about some of the other AI research tools that are out there. And yesterday I was in a tax leadership meeting where the topic of the testing that our firm had done on the AI tool, and I knew it was bad because I'd already tested it, and the answers I got were pretty rubbish, and it was the consensus of pretty much everyone that tested it that it was rubbish. But what the VAT partner, what they mentioned was that it was so bad that actually it misquoted the year of the VAT Act, so it got the year wrong. So that's not an issue of garbage in terms of the question. I'm sure that was definitely just garbage out.
It has this imperative AI that it needs to create an answer. And it tries to do that in the best way possible. This is why you have specialist AIs. So there won't just be an AI that you can use for tax or general, and you use for various things. Of course, you can use them for all sorts of things. But when you have specialist AIs, whether it be tax, whether it be chemistry, weather prediction, or so on, the information that we'll be collating will be using or focused on source information that is specific to that subject, so that it doesn't hopefully make a nonsense of its in its answer. It will be, if you like, checking the information from everywhere against information it can absolutely rely on, which is, if you like, its main source data. So in tax, if you want it to focus on your database as an AI producer, it will focus on your database of material. It will use information from everywhere on the web, but it will use your database, your information, as a yardstick by which to modify and generate its answers. Hopefully that makes sense.
So, just wait a second there then, because I thought with your tool, for example, the only place it looked was your bank of tax resources, but that's actually not entirely true then. It uses that as like the main reference point, let's say, and then it still looks along the wider web and then probably compares it back to that reference point to come up with a more sensible answer than if it didn't have your resources as a reference point. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah. Again, Jack, you've hit the nail on the head. That's exactly it. So because you can ask, Grok, which is X's version of the AI model, AI platform, where you can ask Chat GPT the question about tax, and it will give you an answer. And one of the issues that came across my desk in the last few days was someone that had used Chat GPT to generate answers to a tax question, and it was poor. It was just poor. And a lot of that comes down to how the question was phrased. And then, of course, you still need someone to interpret it, even though it's written in plain English. If you're asking AI to produce an answer and you want it to tell you about brain surgery, for example, the terminology and the processes and what's involved are still going to be, unless you know about brain surgery, it's still going to be a mystery to you. So it's giving you a lot of useful information, but actually it's not that useful to you. It's probably more useful to someone that actually understands the concepts. So, and the same is true of tax. So yeah, again, I hope that makes some sense to you.
Yeah. So let's move on to then like the actual usage then of AI in tax research in particular. So like from your perspective then, in particular someone who's obviously tested it a lot and probably knows what works well and what doesn't work so well, like how can it be used in the tax research process then? And I suppose in particular, like, how do you recommend it is used in that process?
Okay, yeah. What I would say primarily it's good for is for research. That sort of sounds blindingly obvious, but it's good at research. It's not ideal for planning, which is a somewhat of a shame. So If you ask it for, let's say, "Oh, give me some ideas about how to save tax on it, X, Y, or Z," it's not especially good at that, because it will certainly, because it has this imperative of wanting to provide an answer, it will provide an answer, but you're unlikely to get something that is specific to your client's circumstances. I mean, you know from being in practice yourself that, a client will come to you and they will want some answers and some questions, and they will say, "Oh, well, John's exactly the same as me, and his accountant did X, Y, and Z, or I've read about X, Y, and Z happening." But it's very rare that two tax cases stand on all fours together. They will be different. There will be differences. And so consequently, you cannot rely on AI to give a single answer. You may ask it to do some planning around the question or a type of income, and you may get different answers on each occasion. They will be reasonable answers, but they're not going to be really things. It may give you ideas. It may give you ideas, but it's not a planning tool. The answer is you gather the facts from it, you do the research, get it to cover the things that you may not have thought of. So, for example, you may have asked it about company purchase of own shares, and it will come back. You're expecting some information about tax clearances, and it comes back and it gives you a lot of information about the other consequences of it. For example, IHT consequences, company law consequences and remedies. So you may come to the conclusion then, well, actually, I hadn't thought about those. So from that point of view, it is good for planning, but basically you've got to fit it all together. It's up to you. It will provide the nuts and bolts. You've got to fit it together. So research, planning, but only insofar as gathering information is concerned. It'll still be down to you as the practitioner to make it into something coherent, to make a coherent plan.
Yeah. So I suppose in relation to the research bit in particular, then, like ignoring all the other bits that kind of sit around the edges. So because obviously before AI, you would have had a question, you might have Googled it if you were fairly new to tax, dare I say, but ideally you'd be going to like legislation, you'd be going to guidance, you'd be going to HMRC guidance, and you'd be like getting all the pieces separately and then like bringing it all together, essentially. So like instead of doing, well, or maybe it's part of that process, does AI fit in well to help with that at all, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. It's not to say it's infallible, and that's because possibly of the way in which you phrased the question, and I've sort of hinted at this before, and maybe now is the time to get into it. When you look at a Google search, or you use any other search engine, you're looking for specific information that will drag up source information, which you will then read, whether it be legislation, whether it be HMRC policy, whether it be articles published by tax advisors. But it will gather that. It will be up to you to then put that all together and make sense of it. AI will do that for you. Obviously, it will gather that information, and particularly when you use an AI that's trained with a particular source, like our AI, which is, we call it Genial. That AI is based on our content, which covers the whole raft of taxes, and they said is the yardstick by which it creates its answers. So it will do the Google search bit, if you like, drag in all this information. So you should have a full picture, and then it will shuffle it all together, measure it against our content, and produce, hopefully, if not the whole picture, then a much fuller picture than you would have been able to perhaps achieve if you were doing it in the old-fashioned way with either books or even online searches, depending on how you prefer to work, and sticking lots of either virtual or real post-it notes all over bits of paper and then trying to consume it all, fit it all together in your head. Hopefully AI will do that for you, or should do that for you, so that you can move ahead and be whatever project that you were working on.
Yeah. So I suppose really this is the way that I'm thinking about it anyway, and this might not be exactly the way that you think about it, but for me, it very much speeds up that initial information gathering, fact finding part of the research, where you're actually just trying to find the relevant rules, the relevant legislation, because rather than having to look in like 50 different places, you basically type in the question, the AI looks in the 50 different places for you, it gives its interpretation of the answer, references some of the places or all the places where it's got that information from, so then you can go and check it. So I think really that's the bit where it's most helpful at the moment, because we'll come on to it probably in a bit when we talk about precautions, but obviously it's not always reliable, and you can't just assume that answer is correct, right, regardless of how simple the question is.
I'll just give you one last example of that. I think this is something that this is one of the other thing that came onto my desk a couple of days ago. Someone asked the question, and it seemed on the face of it to be a very simple question, and it produced an incorrect answer. I use the example as if you asked AI, if you put a question to AI and what you said to it was just simply typed in, what's the tax-free personal allowance? ? Now, as the AI is going to do its best. It doesn't actually, maybe what you wanted to know was what the current amount of personal tax allowance was. But actually, it doesn't know that. All it knows is you've asked it what it is, and so it, in this particular case, will give you an explanation of it's a tax-free amount that every UK resident individual can have, and you'll get no mention of the amount. And even if it did provide an amount, since you hadn't put in the question which year you wanted it for, it won't know which year to provide. So if it does mention it, may not be the personal allowance for the correct year. So those are the sort of dangers you get with using AI. It's also why you can, we're getting on to safeguards and checking now, and you can ask me about those in detail now. But that is one of the things you've got to do. You've got to be aware that when you're asking a question, you need to be as precise as possible.
Yeah. And actually, I mean, on this note, I think it actually makes you realise how ambiguous some of the things that you say are. Because it's like one of the troubles I had when I first started delegating to juniors is I thought I was being dead clear. But then it was only when the work came back that I questioned whether I was actually clear or not, or whether it was them. Yeah. But obviously you've waited probably 2 or 3 days for them to do the work then. And then you've got the feedback 2-3 days later. Whereas what I quite like about using AI tools actually is if your question was ambiguous, you're finding out within a matter of seconds or minutes whether you were clear or not.
Well, hopefully you are.
Yeah. So I actually think a side benefit of using AI is I think it's going to help us to be more clear in our communication, because we're going to be more aware for the potential ambiguities in what we're saying.
Perfect. Yeah, exactly. I suppose the biggest problem I'm seeing with it is that lack of clarity in what people want. Remember that every time you question AI, you use AI to question it, it's starting from scratch. You could actually be asking it a question, and in our particular platform, Genial, you can ask it about employment law and so on, and health and safety issues, as well as tax issues, and it's trained on all of those. But the point is that each time you come to it and ask a question, it doesn't know. It's putting the hand into a virtual box of questions, pulling out a question and answering it. Now that means it's got no context. When you tend to ask a question, you have in mind a context when you ask that question. So you already got predetermined thoughts in your mind. AI doesn't. It starts from a zero. And so it's doing its best to answer your question. You have to give it that context. And if you do so, clearly, it will give you a good answer.
If you're interested in seeing the Genial tool that's been referred to throughout this episode, head on over to thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/AI. As a listener of the podcast, you'll be able to get a discount if you do decide to purchase the tool. Just mention that you listen to the podcast. Secondly, If you want you or your tax staff to be highly skilled tax professionals, then my course is purely for tax professionals, helping to develop valuable skills for working in tax may be what you need. Forget about technical CPD sessions on tax rules that are boring and where you learn very little. Think engaging, impactful, and actually becoming a better tax professional. That's what my courses are all about. If this sounds good to you, head on over to taxprofessionalspodcast.com/flyer to get some information on all of the courses that I offer and also the expected return on investment. Back to the episode. Yeah. Shall we talk a little bit about the precautions then in a bit more detail? So I've got a few noted down here that I was going to ask about, but you might have some ones that are already in your head that you think are better to talk about. But I have got one example. It was I asked. It was actually your tool that I asked the question to. I asked the question to the tool. I knew it was incomplete because I knew enough about the topic to know that it was incomplete. And so I knew at that point to basically say to it, are you sure this is everything? Are you sure this is complete, basically? And then it came back and gave me an answer that appeared to be complete. But obviously, if you don't know enough about the topic, how would you know to ask that question? And so I suppose part of my thought process is you just have to build a habit of always asking it to check itself so that it always does that automatically. And actually, does it check when it checks itself? Will it always do a good job of that or not?
Dealing with the first point, I think it's good to have that habit to always, even if you don't know, even if the answer looks complete to you, I think it's always good to interrogate. And you will see on the latest iteration of Genial which is in keeping actually with the model the platform we base it on with his Chat GPT, that you will get prompts, particular prompts to say, do you want more information? Do you want to target any particular point? There are prompts anyway, or you can just type in and say, look, I need more information about this. And so if none of the prompts are really working for you and you want to be sure, you should get into the habit of asking it maybe to check if there's anything within. If you know absolutely nothing about what it's told you, then I'm not really sure you should be in tax anyway. But I mean, really, if you're in tax and you're asking it a question, you would expect there to be the person to have some knowledge about tax. And so you would expect them to be able to ask it a question. It may be, are there any other aspects to this? Or are there any other tax aspects, any other legal aspects to whatever the bit of research or question you've asked? Or you can just simply ask it to check that. You can ask it to check that particular part of an answer and provide more, not just more detail, but you can ask it to provide the statutory references, say, because as I said, which is before that there is within Genial, which is the tool that you used, it not only looks at our content, it fishes for information in the wider pool. So it will look there, and if it can't find what it wants in our content, it will usually find it elsewhere. So the short answer is ask it. Always ask it, unless it's really something simple like what's the date today, in which case I think you can probably rely on that. I would hope so anyway.
Yeah. So what other precautions should be taken then when using it?
Right. We've sort of covered some of them anyway, or touched on them. So yes, but in real practical terms, what should you be thinking about? Well, your own expertise. If, for a start, so you mentioned that you knew the answer was incomplete. So you're using your own expertise to judge something. Now, obviously, it seems a bit backward to be using your judgment when you've just paid money for an AI to provide an answer. But it may be that there were some vagaries in your question or missing parts, the reason why it hasn't answered or hasn't provided what you thought might be there. So use your own expertise, use some common sense. If it sounds wrong, like I mentioned about the ERS question earlier, where it gave me something that was completely nothing to do with ERS at all. it was clear that it had misunderstood the question or didn't have the resources with which to find that. So you should be looking out for those things and interrogating them. And you also use your colleagues. Now, I appreciate, again, that, it depends on the size of the practice and how you're organised, but there's no harm in, if something doesn't look quite right, or just getting someone to cast their eye over something. If you're not sure about something anyway, which is why you're asking AI for the question, or you just want some research material, you could say to someone, look, these are the bullet points it's provided. Yeah, does that look right to you? Obviously, you don't want to duplicate work, and that's not the point. It sounds almost like one is diminishing the role of AI. It's not really. It is just a precaution. And again, the level of precaution you take will depend on the complexity of question that you're asking it and your own expertise. So your own expertise and that of those people immediately around you. You don't want to be spending days or hours or even many minutes double checking what AI says, but you should certainly be checking the parts that just look a little bit wrong, and then in any event you may want to, as going forward, having got the base information from the AI and maybe a lot of detail as well, you may want to look up, for the purpose of providing the advice, if the AI says this is in HMRC policy notice or business brief, then you may want to get that and you may want to download that. Often it'll be available. You might be able to access that information through the AI, or if you can ask it to fetch that information. If it isn't available, then you can find it directly, and so it allows you to build up very quickly all the information that you would want to give a full answer or to do some full planning for someone with all the backup documents. I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm old school, but for me, I want almost every conceivable document cross-reference out there that exists. I want that on my file for when I'm providing advice to someone. So, and it will point you in the right direction. At the very, very least, it will point you in the right direction. At the most, it will say, yeah, well, get me that information, and we'll get that information for you.
Yeah, because it's the bit that I always find, I suppose, the hardest, and particularly the hardest to teach when doing tax research, is almost the element of being 100% thorough, which is, as you say, pretty much finding everything that exists on it to make sure that you check everything and you've missed nothing. So I don't think the AI tool will complete that bit of the task for you. It will help you do it quicker because it will give you so much information so quickly, but you still then got to take that step back and just make sure that everything has been considered. So you probably still need to take a look in the ledge, and you still need to take a look at maybe some commentary just to make sure. But yeah, because I actually deliver training on how to do tax research, and kind of broadly speaking, the process that I say people should go to, and it's never this linear, but like start off by defining the scope of your research. So what are you actually trying to find the answer to, or what's the question that you've got? You've got like step 2, which is then finding like relevant information to be able to, any relevant information around the tax rules that apply to the situation. So then you can move on to the applying bit of it, the interpreting first, interpret, apply, and then conclude type thing. So I think the conclude bit, you don't really want to rely on the AI for the conclusion. No. You don't want to rely on it for the interpretation and the application, but I think it will go a significant way in helping you to find the relevant information. That's still where I think it's the big use case.
That's the big gain. Although I do think the only I qualify with that is that there are circumstances, and I've been surprised by it actually, where it will alert me to something that I hadn't thought about. Not something I would like to think that I don't know about, but I hadn't thought about. So, as I said, I think I gave the example of company purchase their own shares, where it's a pet topic of mine, you may have guessed, but there is a lot more to it than tax clearances. I mean, there is so much more to it than tax clearances. Everything from company law and company administration through to stamp duty and board meeting minutes, so on and so forth, all of which hopefully AI might alert you to that you may not have thought of. But as you say, ultimately, yeah, it will give you at the very least the bare bones, well, a bit more than that, I would hope. It will give you bare bones with a little bit of flesh on it, and then it's up to you to make the complete picture.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I agree, absolutely. So, yeah, but those are the precautions, yes. Cross-checking, start by interrogating always. That's your first port of call. Do the cross-checking. Add to... you're only presumably going to be asking it questions if you're doing something, if you're tackling an issue for a client, or they've asked you to do some planning around something, or give you some advice in respect to something. So you'll have a particular project in mind, whether it's a simple project like a yes or no answer on whether or not, let's say, R&D relief will be available for a particular type of expenditure in the particular circumstances of the company. That you can ask it that sort of question, and you're going to get a pretty good answer. But you do need to be cross-checking and reviewing and doing those things. I don't think there's anything else other than that to be concerned about in terms of using it. Just don't assume it's the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So,
Yeah. No, exactly. Agreed. We've got tax advisors at the moment that are testing out AI tools, and I know one person in particular that is using Chat GPT and Copilot, and they are claiming to have success with it. So, do you think that it can still be used in, let's say, a similar way to a tool like your one, or do you think a tool like your one is just like, say, significantly better than the other tools, and if so, like, I suppose, why? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So what the scenario you're talking about here is someone with some tax expertise, or maybe a lot of tax expertise, using AI for their purposes.
Yes,
exactly. The line of difference, if you like, is if someone with tax expertise, they ask the question, we compare that to, say, Genial, which is our AI. It has a very specific, as well as having all the resources available on general AI platforms, it has specific knowledge. So it's more likely to give you a precise answer first time round. So that is where I would say your advantage is, the difference between the two. And it's probably got some, because of that underlying expertise, if you like, it's probably got a slightly greater tolerance in terms of dealing with the questions you ask it. So, yeah, it may be able to interpret better. I can't say for sure, but, and I think it depends on the nature of the question, but it's quite likely, I think, that it will be able to better interpret what you want than a general AI platform.
Yeah.
So that's what I would say. I'd like to test it. I have seen plenty of answers from both, but usually the disparity comes with the quality of the question. So, yeah.
Yeah. So fair enough then. So actually, I suppose this is me almost summarising what I think you're saying is basically those tools, the more general tools, are not useless when it comes to tax research, but more likely than not, it's going to be more difficult to get the answer out of it because it's going to have more difficulty interpreting your question and answering it. And I suppose, secondly, you're going to have to probably do more iterations because of the fact it doesn't necessarily understand as well what you're asking it, and again, what the answer is.
Yeah, again, that's absolutely right. So, I mean, horses for courses, you know, which is why, as I said early in the discussion, that they're not just while a general AI model will give you answers about brain surgery and rocket science, the AI models that rocket scientists and brain surgeons use are actually trained to deal with those particular topics. There's a reason for that. It's not just for fun. It's because it provides a better route to the answer, and hopefully a more rounded and more accurate answer, ultimately, without the need to keep reiterating the question.
Yes, no, that makes sense. Makes sense. I'm actually somewhat surprised by your stance on it. Actually, with the other tools, because I thought you'd have been like, oh, they're absolutely useless. Don't use them for tax. But actually, like you saying that they do help, but they're just not as good as tax trained ones because they haven't been trained specifically on tax, whereas the tax ones have been.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
it's like talking to your high street accountant, and no offense to them, about R&D issues for which they probably deal with relatively few, if any, and then talking to an R&D expert. You may well get to the same answer, but it's going to be a lot harder work and require more input, I suspect, from the questioner to get that information out of his local account. I think that's.
I suppose, as long as obviously that local accountant's going to have to do more reading and more research, and it's going to take them longer than it would do for someone that's an R&D expert. So exactly. I suppose that's pretty much exactly what the AI tool is doing as well. It's getting there quicker because we've already built within it is closer to the answer in a way.
Precisely. So. Yeah,
that makes sense. So, just as one last quick question then. So, what do you recommend people do then on the back of this episode?
Well, and the obvious answer is give it a whirl, give it a go. But I mean, and by all means, start with general AI. So, yeah, use it. Try it out on something general, but keep in mind that you're using a general AI model, so it may not give as good as answers. So don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Look at it critically, interrogate it, see how good it is, and say, well, is this something I can use? Yes, it is. How should I use it? And then you make the decision, well, am I going to use the free to access model? Or do I want something with expertise? So use it first, make that decision, whether you can use it, try getting it to produce documents and upload documents to it and ask it to analyze them and so on, see how you feel about it. And then after you've dipped your toe in the water and decided you like the temperature, then dive in and use it. So that's the obvious thing to do, but be prepared. Be open-minded, I would say. Be open-minded about it. Don't just assume, as many people I've spoken to, that it's just a simple research tool. It will and does research very well, but particularly for the high street firms, small up to medium-sized firms of accountants, it can produce endless documents for you that you're now taking or struggling with time over. They can write individual letters for you on the particular topic, so you can do the research and then on the back of it say, right, turn this into a letter for me that can go to Joe Bloggs, my client. Then it's very good at that. So for the larger firms, well, obviously they are going to be embracing this shortly anyway. So I don't think there's they need any encouragement. They're already getting on board with this. I think it's the smaller firms that need to. I think there's a willingness to do it. From what I understand, 80% apparently of advisors and accountants intend to use it, but only something like 25% are using it at the moment. Well, my response to that is, well, what are you waiting for? And obviously I want to say, what are you waiting for? Come and have a look at our AI. But no, do start off with something, see how you like it, see about how it might work for you, and then choose your particular model and plow ahead with that.
Yeah, that makes sense. I suppose, well, for anyone that's new to using it, it's just take on board the advice from this episode today. And I suppose from my perspective, particularly when you're putting in like a question, make sure you give it the context that sits around the question. So don't just go and say, is this taxable? Give like some extra context that it understands, I suppose, what's in your mind. Because as Tony alluded to earlier, like it's not in your mind. So unless you tell it what's there, it won't know about it and therefore can't give you a good answer. And then just do like the precautionary safeguarding checks that we talked about as well, just to really interrogate it and make sure that it seems like it's right. And I think just know it's not going to be good in every circumstance either. Like it might be good in say 80% and not in 20. So just persist and see if you get to anywhere with it where it's helpful.
Yeah. I mean, if it saves overall, it should save you time as well. And time, as they say, is money. So, it's not all about that. I mean, for me, it's always been about getting it right. But you can't ignore the commercial benefit to it. And yeah, I think that is where it is particularly strong. That's where it thinks, well, a practitioner may think, well, I'm going to, I'm going to spend 800, 900,000 pounds on this model, but what's it going to save me in time? Which is you can get more done. Just chargeable hours, you can get more done. I think it only comes to reducing staff in much, much bigger firms. If you've only got a tax manager, 2 tax seniors, and three or four juniors, it's probably not going to make a big difference to your staffing. You might be able to perhaps lose one of the juniors because those that remain are going to be able to use AI to get through more work. But I think, in larger firms, it will be, there's a very much a commercial aspect about reducing staffing costs. And in very, very small firms, in one-man bands, it's all about knowledge and accuracy and being able to get the expertise that you just haven't got the time to gain. So yeah, it fits. It's a one size fits all for different reasons. I'm sure that makes sense, but yeah, it has its uses in every size of advisory business, tax advisory business.
So, as Tony suggested, I advocate having a go at using an AI tool in relation to tax research and see how you get on using the advice provided throughout this episode. Show notes for this episode are at thetaxprofessionalpodcast.com/TTPP120. Within the show notes, you'll get all the links mentioned throughout this episode, including a link to the flyer on my courses, a link to where you can book a demo to see Genial in action. But in any event, if you're interested in how I can help you or your tax team with my training to help you master tax skills, improve efficiency, increase billing, and improve quality of work, then you can send me a message on LinkedIn or email me at jack@thetaxprofessionalpodcast.com. These contact details are also in the show notes. I'm not sure when the next episode of the podcast will be released yet, as I am having a little bit of a break from releasing episodes. The next episode will probably be in either August or September, but this is to be confirmed. But if you're subscribed for my email notifications, then you will get an email when the next one goes live. You can also subscribe in Apple Podcasts and in Spotify in order to get a notification when episodes go live. And to subscribe, you can head on over to thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/subscribe. You can also follow me on LinkedIn, Jack Bonehill, to keep up to date with what I'm doing and all future podcast episodes. I post pretty regularly on LinkedIn. Some recent episodes that I can recommend that you take a listen to are as follows. TTPP119, which is one about how you can succeed outside of the typical linear tax career paths. This is the most typical tax career path is within accountancy firms moving up the ranks. This episode is actually with Chloe Radcliffe-Scott, who has done an amazing job of doing this. She's had a very squiggly career, and she's had this success whilst living with Crohn's. Next one is TTPP118, which is with Sejal Gupta, who is an amazing woman in tax voice, who reinvented herself and her tax career after her divorce. This episode has been very popular to date. The last one to recommend is TTPP113, which is all about why you should develop exceptional tax technical skills as a tax professional, and also the benefits that this will bring to you and your career. This episode is just a solo one with just me. It's nicely connected actually to this episode. But that's it for this episode. I hope you found the episode useful and have taken away some useful points to help you to progress, develop, or improve your tax career. Until next time.